Hey guys, and welcome back to the Graceful Tangle YouTube channel. I'm Amy Kate, and today I'm going to be showing you how to knit your very own pair of Shortie socks. I'm so excited to finally be filming this tutorial for you guys and just showing you how I knit my Shortie socks. These are so super quick to knit and extremely beginner friendly, so I encourage you to give them a try. I have linked down in the description box below the pattern that I'm going to be using. It is a free pattern called My Success Shorties Socks. Again, that'll be linked down below. I recommend putting it out and highlighting your size just so that it makes this tutorial that much easier to follow. I'm going to be knitting the size small throughout the duration of the tutorial, but just be sure to change the stitch counts whenever needed to suit whatever size that you're going to be knitting. I'm going to be showing you how to knit the entire sock. We're going to start with the cuff, do the itty bitty leg placement for the Afterthought heel, then go through the foot, the toe, and then come back and knit the Afterthought heel. I've linked down below all of the materials I'm going to be using in today's video, including the yarn, the needles, the notions. All of that is going to be linked down below, so be sure to check it out if you haven't already. I'm so excited to get started, so let's just go ahead and learn how to knit our very own Shortie socks. Alrighty, so these Shortie socks start off with a 1x1 ribbed cuff, so that is exactly what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to slide this sock out of the way and grab my needles. Again, all of the materials that I am using today are linked down below, so be sure to check those out if you want to use the same needles or yarn that I'm using in today's video. Now we're going to start off by leaving a decent length tail so that we have enough tail to cast on our stitches, and then we are going to make a slip knot and place that on our needles. Now, I like to use the long tail cast on for my socks, but you can use whatever cast on that you prefer. I'm also going to be making it a little bit easier for me to begin the magic loop, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. So for my size, I'm going to cast on 56 stitches. Be sure to, take that number and put in place whatever size that you are knitting. If you're doing a size medium, that's going to be 64, and large is going to be 72 stitches. So I'm casting on 56 stitches, like I said, for the size small. So I'm going to cast on 28, which is half of 56, and that is going to help prepare me for a magic loop. So I'm going to cast on 28 stitches onto this needle. Okay, so I have cast on my 28 stitches, and now you can do this two ways. You could cast on all 56 stitches or whatever stitch count that you're doing, and then split them in half to prepare for the magic loop method of knitting, which is the method I'm going to be using today. You can totally make these socks on DPNs or circulars as well, and the pattern shows you how to accommodate for different methods of knitting. So anyway, you can cast on all 56 stitches, but what I like to do is cast on half that number, so in this case 28, and then I go ahead and pull this needle, fold it in half, and then simply cast on my second set of 28 stitches or the second half of my stitches. This way I don't have to worry about twisting as much, and I don't have to split in the middle after I've already cast on all those stitches. So I'm going to simply start back up by casting on my next stitch. And now that's locked in, and now I'm going to cast on 27 more stitches to total 28. And there's my second set of 28 stitches. So now I have 56 total stitches, and I'm ready to begin working in the round. So I'm going to turn and push this needle in. So now I'm holding my needles in front of me together with the cord to the left. I have the working yarn coming from my front needle, and the stitches that I cast on first, including the first stitch, but that is my slip knot, on my back needle. So I'm ready to begin knitting. I'm going to pull my front needle out and prepare to knit. I'm going to insert my needle into that very first stitch, and now I am ready to begin. So we are going to do 10 rounds of 1x1 rib for the cuff of our sock. You can completely adjust this depending on your preferences. You could do more rounds, you could do less rounds. You can even do a different type of ribbing, such as 2x2 or 3x1 or whatever you prefer. But for this sock, I'm going to do 1x1. So I'm going to work the first round with you. For the first stitch, I like to hold both the tail and the working yarn together, just so I can make that first stitch and that join as seamless and secure as possible. So I'm just going to hold both of those strands together and knit that stitch with both of those strands. And then I'm going to drop the tail and only hold the working yarn, just like this. So the tail is now not in use, it's hanging down. I will leave it in later, and I'm ready to begin. So I just did my knit 1, and now I'm going to purl 1, and I'm going to repeat that all the way across. Knit 1, purl 1. And this is our repeat for 1x1 rib. Okay, so I have just worked 1x1 across the front half of my stitches, and I'm going to turn, push this needle into the second half of my stitches, just like this. These stitches tend to be a little bit tighter because they are all our original cast on stitches. So just be patient when you push that needle in, but they do get looser as you get further along in your sock. I'm going to pull that tail through, and now I'm ready to do the same exact thing on the second half of my stitches. So we're going to begin working needle 2. I'm going to insert my needle, into that first stitch and knit 1, and then I'm going to purl 1. And just like the first half, I'm going to repeat this all the way across. And there we go. I have finished working 1x1 rib across the second half of my stitches, which means I have now completed round 1. Now I'm just going to push my needle back into these stitches again and set up for round 2. So we are simply going to repeat this round 1x1 rib for 10 total rounds, so 9 more, or until your cuff is as long as you want it to be. So I'm going to work 9 more rounds of 1x1 rib, and then I will meet you back here to begin our leg. Okay, so I have now finished my 10 rounds of rib, and I am ready for my leg. Now, one thing to note about the leg of your sock, you can make it however long or short that you want it. This pattern only calls for 1 round for the leg because these are extreme shorty socks, and I really like that about this pattern. But you are more than welcome to customize them however you see fit based on your personal preferences. So I'm going to follow the pattern and knit just 1 round for the leg. And literally all we're going to do is pull our needle out to prepare to knit as normal and knit all of our stitches instead of working the rib. So simply stockinette. This is also what most knitters call vanilla. Vanilla would be just stockinette socks. And then because we're knitting in the round, knitting is just that, knitting. You don't get that stockinette stitch by knitting around and pulling, knitting a row and pulling a row like you would in the working flat. That's my favorite thing about working in the round is that I can achieve this beautiful stitch with just knit stitches. No pulling. Okay, I'm almost to the end of my first needle, which means we are halfway done with this round. And then I will just turn my work, push this needle in, pull the second needle out, and work the second half of my stitches as well. So this round is going to be all I do for my leg, but again, please feel free to customize the length however you see fit based on your personal preferences. Just note that any changes you make to the pattern will affect your required yardage. Yardage is very open-ended when knitting socks because, you can never calculate it for each and every foot size. So yeah, just keep that in mind as well. Okay, I'm almost to the end of this needle as well. So once you have finished the leg of your sock, however long or short that may be, we are ready to work our Afterthought heel setup set. So I have a detailed tutorial on my channel. I will link it down below on the Afterthought heel setup and process of actually knitting it. Feel free to reference that tutorial if you want a little bit more detail. I'm going to cover it thoroughly, but it's going to be pretty basic in this tutorial. So you might find it helpful to go back and reference that one. So I am ready for my Afterthought heel setup. The first step is to work across, the first half of your stitches. So obviously this number varies depending on what size you're doing. Because I am doing the smaller size, I'm going to knit across these first 28 stitches as normal. So I'm literally just knitting across them. And this is going to be the first half of our stitches, and we will work the heel setup rows on the back half of our stitches, because the heel is going to be on the back of our sock, of course. Alright, I am nearing the end. Few more stitches to go. Okay. Now I am going to turn my work and work my heel setup. So I have some scrap yarn over here. This does not have to be anything special. I recommend making it the same weight as whatever yarn you are using. So I'm using a fingering weight yarn. I'm going to be using a fingering weight scrap yarn. You want to make it to be a very different color than whatever you're using, because it's very important that you can see this clearly. So I'm going to be using this super bright hot pink yarn. Yellow would also be a good option for something like this. You just want to make sure that it stands out and is easily visible, so that it's easy to pick up your stitches later down the road. Okay, so I'm going to pull out some here, this tiny little ball, and I'm going to begin my heel setup. So I'm going to simply knit across the second half of our stitches using this this scrap yarn color. So I'm simply leaving my working yarn attached to the other needle. I'm not going to do anything with that right now, but I'm also not going to cut it. So I am simply going to knit across all of these stitches. And this is going to be the start of our heel setup. Just knitting. Almost to the end. Okay, I have made it to the end, and now instead of continuing in the round, I'm going to turn my work and purl back. So this is going to be the second row. This heel setup consists of 3 rows because that gives us a little bit more room and allows the heel to fit a little bit better for every foot versus being a little bit too tight. So I'm going to simply purl back all of these stitches. We're not slipping the first stitch or anything like that. We are simply purling all of these stitches all the way across. Okay, so I just finished purling across all of those stitches, and I'm going to turn my work once again and knit across all of these stitches one last time. This is going to be the last row of our heel setup section. So I'm simply going to continue with the scrap yarn and knit all of these stitches. And there we go. I have knit across all of those stitches. Our heel setup is complete. Now I am going to cut this yarn and set that scrap yarn aside. We won't need it again until you knit your second sock. So our 3 rows are complete. Now we are ready to continue with the foot of our sock. The first step to do that is to slip all of these stitches back to our left hand needle so we can knit them as normally with the working yarn that is already attached to this second needle. So I'm going to simply slip all of these stitches back. I'm inserting my left hand needle through the back of the stitch and then slipping it onto that needle. Doing it this way helps me prevent any twisting of the stitches, which we definitely don't want. So again, I'm going through the stitch. Let's let the camera focus. Through the stitch, from the back, slip off. And we're simply going to do that across all of these stitches. And there we go. I have slipped all of those stitches across. I'm ready to begin knitting. You might find that the very beginning and possibly the very end of this section has a loose stitch at the edge, and that is simply just because that's where we changed colors. So you want to just be sure to keep that nice and tight. It doesn't have to be, super duper tight. You just don't want it to come undone. So I recommend just giving that tail a little tug as you continue knitting the foot of your sock. That's going to just tighten up itself, so you won't have to worry about it. Okay, so I am ready to knit across these stitches with my working yarn as normal, and we will begin the foot of our sock. Okay, Alrighty, there we go. I have knit across all of those stitches. I'm ready to begin the foot. Now, knitting the foot of this sock is super simple. We are literally just going to knit every round just like we did for the leg of the sock. Now, if you are doing the Afterthought heel like I am, you're going to knit every single round until the foot, so measuring from the end of this Afterthought heel setup to wherever your knitting is at that point, until that measures 4¼ inches shorter than your desired foot length. So my foot, for example, is about 8¼ inches long. So I am going to knit for approximately 4 inches, and then I will proceed with my toe and come back and knit the Afterthought heel. Now, if you are only knitting the toe and you've already substituted your preferred heel, the toe measures 2 inches. So you'll simply measure from the tip of whatever heel you decided to knit all the way until you're knitting wherever your knitting is, and then make sure you leave 2 inches for that toe. So I'm going to knit every single round until my sock measures 4¼ inches shorter than what I want it to be, and then I will meet you back here to knit the toe. Okay, so I have now completed the foot of my sock. It is as long as it needs to be in order to compensate for both the toe and the Afterthought heel length, and I'm ready to begin my toe. So the toe is super simple. It consists of 20 rounds, and that is the same for any size, whatever size you're making. So again, I do encourage you to have the pattern printed so that you can read along with the instructions as I say them, just to easily accommodate for each size that you are knitting. Okay, so we are going to start with round 1, which is super simple. It is simply to knit all of your stitches. This toe consists of a 2-round repeat. So the first round and every odd round is simply knitting all of your stitches. Alrighty, there's the conclusion of round 1. So for round 2, and every even row is the same exact thing. We are going to knit 1. So insert your needle onto that first stitch and knit it. Then we're going to slip, slip, and knit those 2 stitches together, just like so. And now we're going to knit all across this first needle until we have 3 stitches remaining. Now remember that I'm working magic loop, and this is half of my stitches. So we're going to repeat the same repeat twice. Now, if you are working on DPNs or 9-inch circulars, simply read through the pattern notes in the section of that pattern so that you can figure out how to accommodate for the differences in your knitting method. Super simple. Okay, so I have 3 stitches remaining, and now I am simply going to knit 2 together. So I'm going to knit those next 2 stitches together as one. That decreases those 2 down to just 1 stitch, and then I'm going to knit that last stitch. And again, I'm going to prepare to knit the second half of my stitches and do that same exact thing again. So I'm going to knit 1, slip, slip, knit, and remember that we are slipping those stitches as purl stitches, so as if to purl. So I've done the slip, slip, knit, and now I'm going to knit until I have 3 stitches remaining once more. Okay, here's my last 3 stitches of the round. I'm going to knit the next 2 stitches together, just like so, and then knit the last stitch. And there's the end of round 2. So we are simply going to repeat rounds 1 and 2 a total of 10 times, or until we have worked 20 total rounds for our toe. I'm going to show you the repeat once more, and then I will leave you to it. So for round 3, or the first round of our repeat, we are going to knit all of the stitches in the entire round. Okay, I have finished round 3, and that is also the first round of our 2-round repeat, and now I'm going to work the second round. So again, this is our decrease round. We're going to start off by knitting the first stitch, and then working our slip, slip, knit. So slip the first stitch as if to purl. Remember the yarn is still in the back. Slip the second stitch as if to purl, and then knit those 2 stitches together. And then we're going to knit until we have 3 stitches remaining. Once you have 3 stitches remaining, we are going to knit 2 together, knit those 2 stitches together, and then knit that last stitch. And now we will prepare to work the second half of our stitches if you're using the magic loop technique. And do those same instructions again. Knit 1, slip, slip, knit, and knit until you have 3 stitches remaining on this needle. Okay, once you have 3 stitches remaining, simply knit the next 2 stitches. Oh. Okay, once you have 3 stitches remaining, simply knit the next 2 stitches together, and then knit that very last stitch. And that is at the end of our 2 round repeat. So like I said, we're going to repeat this until we have worked a total of 20 rounds or 10 repeats. The amount of stitches that you have left is going to vary depending on the size, but I will have those written up here in the top left-hand corner for you to follow along if that helps you. And again, it's written out in the pattern, of course, as well. A really easy way to count for me is to count the slip, slip, knit stitches, because those are pretty easy to see with that little dash from the first stitch that we slipped. So you can see that I have 1 slip, slip, knit stitch, and then there's my second, which means that I have worked 4 rounds in the repeat, or 2 total repeats. So I'm going to repeat that until I have 10 total repeats, and then I'll meet you back here to work the Kitchener stitch. Okay, so I have finished the toe of my sock, and I have the correct amount of stitches left according to my size, and now I am ready to work the Kitchener stitch to close my toe. Now I do have a detailed tutorial on my YouTube channel on how to work the Kitchener stitch, and I'll link that down below if you want a more detailed version of what I'm about to show you, but I'm just going to kind of briefly go over it in this video. So I'm going to start by cutting my yarn that's attached to my working yarn. I'm going to leave a decent tail just to ensure that I have enough to work both the Kitchener stitch and then weave in my tail securely after I complete it. Now I'm going to thread it through my yarn needle and pick up my needles. So the first thing you need to do is ensure that the working yarn is coming from the back needle and you are ready to begin. So we're going to work our setup first. What I have found in order to avoid ears in Kitchener stitch is to work a setup that is different than what you typically would for Kitchener stitch. So traditionally you would go in the first stitch as if to purl, and then in the back stitch as if to knit to set you up correctly. I skip that for closing the toes of socks because I find that it helps make it a little bit smoother of a finish. So I'm simply going to insert my needle into the first stitch and slide it off as if to knit. And then I'm going to insert the needle into the second stitch as if to purl and pull that yarn through. And then on the back needle, I'm going to slip that stitch off as if to purl. So I'm going from the front without splitting that stitch. And then I'm going to insert my needle again into the next stitch as if to knit and pull through once more. You don't want to pull this too tight because you don't want it to become too cinched up, but you do want to keep it nice and secure. So I do give it a generous tug there. And now we're just going to continue those steps all the way across. So we're going to knit off and then pull on is our little chant. So I'm going to push that needle through as if to pull and pull it through. And then on the back needle, we're going to pull off. So slip that stitch off as if to pull. And then knit on, insert that stitch as if to knit, and pull all the way through, leaving that stitch on the needle. And like I said, we're just going to repeat that all the way across. Knit off, pull on, pull off, knit on. Okay, so I'm almost to the end here. I have 2 stitches left on each needle. So I'm going to still stick with the same thing that I've been doing in the past. Knit off, pull on that last stitch, then pull off, and knit on that last stitch. And then just on these last two, I will knit off that first stitch and then pull on that last stitch, pull all the way through, again giving it a nice tug. Then you'll see that you'll have a little ear on this left hand side that will appear because you went through both of those stitches at once. So what I like to do is just turn my sock around to the back. So here's our Afterthought heel setup, or your regular heel if you chose a different method. So I'm on the back of my sock here. I'm just going to insert my needle into this last decrease that we did. So right through those stitches. Pull that through. And as you can see, it completely hides that ear, which is just perfect. And now I just like to insert my hand into the sock and then pull the needle down. I kind of like to go down one more row as well. So just went through that decrease. I'm going to go through, let's see, like right here, and simply grab the needle with the hand that's in my sock, pull that all the way through, and then I will turn the entire sock inside out so that I can weave it in using the purl bumps. And the best trick that I have found to weave in a sock, weave in an end extra securely for a sock, something that's going to be used heavily, I like to split the purl stitches. So on this opposite side, I'm just going to intentionally split the yarn where I worked those purl stitches and just go straight down quite a few stitches. Again, you really want this to be secure. Just like that. So I went through all of those, splitting them intentionally. Now I'm going to pull that through, and then I'm going to do that 2 more times. So I'm going to go back up and then back down again. And that's what it's going to look like when you're done. So you'll kind of be able to see the yarn going up and over. And again, it is not going to come out. So I'm just going to trim that nice and close to that last stitch. And then I will also go ahead and weave in this very beginning end that we had for our cast on, because I like to get that out of the way as well. So I'm going to thread that through. And then again, my sock is still turned inside out, so the wrong side is facing me. My favorite way to weave in this end is to go through the cast on stitch once. So that's through the entire sock, and that helps kind of seal that beginning of round a little bit better. And then I'm going to weave in and out of this row of knits. So I'm just going to insert my needle into half of that knit stitch, wrap it around, whoops, lost it there, wrap the needle around and grab the second one in that row. Wrap it around, grab the third one, and so on and so forth all the way down. I have found that a bent tip tapestry needle, like the one that I'm using, really helps with this technique, but of course you can do it with a standard straight tapestry needle as well. Or your needle, whichever you like to call it. It really doesn't matter that much. I've never had this come undone. And this is the method that I use for the brim of a sock or a hat or even sweaters. It's just really, really handy to have. So now I'm going to go back up the next one about halfway. So I have inserted my needle into a purl bump of the next rib section. And then I'm just going to repeat that same exact process about halfway up the next line of knit stitches, just like that. Pull the needle all the way through, pull the yarn securely, and then trim it. And there we go. Now we can set those tails aside, flip our sock inside out. Now, if you have, again, chosen to knit a different heel, you are most likely done with your sock. If you are doing the Afterthought heel, like I am doing in this pair, stay tuned and we will knit the Afterthought heel. Okay, so I'm ready to pick up my stitches from the waste yarn and knit my Afterthought heel. Now, just like the Kitchener stitch, I do have a very detailed video on my channel of how to knit the Afterthought heel. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. It will be linked down in the description box below. But in this video, I'm just going to walk you through it a little bit more quickly. So I have my needles, the same exact ones that I used for the rest of my sock, including the toe. So if you did the rest of your sock in like 9-inch circulars and then you switched to magical leap or DPNs for the toe, you want to be sure to do magical leap or DPNs for the heel as well, because the heel and the toe in my patterns are identical except for the first few rounds. So that is what we are going to do right now. So definitely have your needle and scissors handy so that you are prepared for the entirety of this heel. And we are going to start by picking up the stitches. Now, it doesn't matter whether you start on the foot of the sock or the leg of the sock. Honestly, I'm not super consistent when I do it. It's kind of just whatever I get to first, I guess. The biggest thing is to make sure to pick up the right leg of whichever side that you start on. So, I'm going to start with the foot facing out for this sock. Again, it really doesn't matter, guys. So, I'm going to hold my sock up to the camera nice and close so you can see it. What I'm going to do is pick up the first row after these 3 rows of the heel setup section. So go all the way to the right side, find that very first stitch. So here is our last stitch of the setup row. I'm going to insert my needle and pick up the right leg of that stitch of the row right above it. And then I'm going to do that all the way across. Once you get to the end, you should have half the amount of stitches that you started with. So for the size small, I started with 56 stitches. So I want to pick up stitches, and I should have 28 at the end. Okay, I have picked up the first half of my stitches. I have 28. Now I'm simply going to pull this needle out. If you're using DPNs, this is where you would grab a second or third DPN, however you have chosen to split up your stitches so that you can work in the round. But I am using magic loop, so I'm just going to pull this needle out and pick up the second half. So now I'm going to pick up the right leg of all of these stitches on the row above the Afterthought heel setup. So I'm going to start over here at the very first stitch. Right here, pick up the right leg of that stitch. And I'm going to do that all the way across. Alrighty, and now I have picked up the second half of my stitches, so I'll just push this needle in to keep both ends nice and steady while I cut the waist yarn out. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys in this video. You can be professional and neat and just pick up one leg, so that would look like picking up one random leg of any of these waist yarn stitches, pulling it up like this, cutting it, trimming it, and working like evenly picking out all of those stitches all the way across. That is the exact method that I use in my other Afterthought heel video. That's a little bit more detailed and neat. Again, that's linked down below if you want to check it out. Now, over time, as I have knit more and more and more Afterthought heels, I have knit so many of these heels, you guys, at this point. What I like to do is literally cut across the entire waist joint, and that is exactly what I'm going to do in this video. So I'm going to carefully, I am careful with this, I promise, you know what I'm doing. So I'm going to lift up this nice and close to the camera so you can see. Now these 3 rows are 3 extra rows, and what they do is they give us a little bit more room in this heel section so that this Afterthought heel fits nice and snug without being tight and pulling on the instep part of your foot. I have found this to be the most comfortable way to knit an Afterthought heel. And again, you can see that these are 3 extra, so it's not going to have the same amount up at the top of the sock. So this first stitch is going to be a little bit loose, and there's going to be a gap there, and that's exactly what we want to find. So here is my finger trying to poke through that hole. Again, here's my finger with the gap. Here's the waist join. Here's the front of the sock. So what I'm going to do, open up my scissors. You want to get nice and sharp scissors, preferably small ones as well, so that you can kind of control what you're doing. I'm going to insert my scissors into that gap. Now I have carefully placed them to where I am only cutting the waist join and not any of the, already knit stitches. You can insert your hand into the sock so that you haven't caught anything up at the front. And I'm literally just going to cut all the way across, guys. I know it's a little bit terrifying, but trust me, it is not as scary as it may seem, and I encourage you to give it a shot. Again, you can always just cut one leg and unpick from there. So I am simply going to cut, 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 and then once more, carefully, this is where we're going to end up at that other end. So I've inserted the tip of my scissors through the opposite gap on the other end and trim that one last time. Now we have a hole in our sock, which is exactly what we want, and we are simply just going to pull all of this yarn out. So it's going to be a little bit messy. It's not going to be as neat, like I said, as the other, just picking one leg and pulling it out that way. It's not going to be as neat as that method. There are going to be a bunch of little strands here in just a second that I will then move out of the way of the frame of the camera. But again, it's just so quick, and it's hard to be slower when I know a method to be quick, I guess. So I'm going to start at this end and simply pull this in to prepare. It will most likely be a little bit snug and tight at the end of the sock, so keep that in mind. And I will just work on pulling all of these out. And here I am, all set up and ready to work my Afterthought heel. So that literally took me like a minute, you guys. Had I just cut one leg, it would have been totally fine. I would have had more control over it, most likely, but it would have taken me a little bit longer. So it's really whatever method that you feel the most comfortable doing. Like I said, I've knit so stinking many of these Afterthought heels, and that is just the way that I have come to prefer it. So now I'm ready to begin knitting. Grab your working yarn. This is where, if you want to knit a contrasting heel, I think that would be so cute. You can totally do that, and this is where you would use your contrast color yarn. For me, I'm just doing one solid color, or, one speckled if we're being technical. And so I am just going to use the same yarn that I used for the rest of my sock. So I have the working yarn ready. I'm going to pull the back needle out and prepare to knit. So the first step is to knit across all of the stitches on your first needle. Again, it should be half of your stitches. Okay, I've worked across half of my stitches, and now we are going to pick up a couple of stitches in this section here so that we can avoid any gaps. So I'm simply going to insert my needle into any stitch along that gap, yarn over my needle, and pull up a loop. And we have picked up, well, I just lost it. Let's try that again. There we go. Insert your needle into any of those stitches, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And we have picked up one stitch. So we're going to do that one more time to pick up 2 extra stitches. And there we go. I've picked up 2 extra stitches, and now I'm going to do the same exact thing for the second half. I'm going to knit across all of these stitches, then pick up 2 extra ones at the very end. Okay, I have knit across the second half of my stitches, and I have picked up 2 at the very end. So now I'm ready to begin the next round. Now this is going to be a decrease round, and it's going to get us back down to that original starting count that we had for the rest of our sock. We have 4 extra stitches right now because we picked up 2 at the very end of either side of the needle to eliminate those gaps. And in this round, we are simply going to decrease those stitches. So I'm going to knit across all of the stitches on my first needle. That first one might be a little bit loose because that was the first stitch that we did. So just give you a little tail of tug to secure that stitch. We're going to knit all the way down until we have 4 stitches remaining. Okay, I have 4 stitches remaining, and now we are going to knit 2 together twice to eliminate those 2 extra stitches. So we're simply going to insert our needle into the next 2 stitches, yarn over and pull up a loop to work our first knit 2 together, and then do that once more with the last 2. And these are knitting together those 2 extra stitches that we picked up. And there we go. And now we will just do that same exact thing on the second half of our stitches. Knit all the way across until you have 4 stitches remaining. And then knit 2 together twice. Okay, and there is the end of our second setup round. So now we are going to begin our heel. We're going to start off with a few stockinette rounds. Now the amount of rounds varies just a little bit depending on what size that you're doing, and it's just to accommodate for a larger heel for the foot size. That amount is listed in the pattern, and I'll put it up at the left-hand corner, of course. And we are going to work those stockinette rounds. So I am knitting the size small, and I am just going to knit 1 round. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll meet you back here to begin our decrease and repeat for the heel. Okay, so I have worked my stockinette round. Again, that number will vary just a little bit depending on what size you're doing, so be sure to check and make sure you have done the correct amount. Now we are ready to begin our heel. The heel is exactly the same as our toe from here on out. We are going to work a stockinette round and then the decrease round, the same one that we did for the toe, for 20 total rounds or 10 repeats, and then we will close up with the Kitchener stitch. So I'm going to show you the repeat once, and then I will leave you to it. So for round 1, we are going to simply knit all of our stitches all the way around. Okay, we have worked round 1, and now round 2 is our first decrease round, the second half of our repeat. We're going to knit the first stitch, slip, slip, knit, and then knit until we have 3 stitches remaining. Okay, I have 3 stitches remaining. I'm just going to knit 2 together and then knit 1, and I will simply repeat that same decrease round on the second half of my stitches. So we're literally just going to repeat that repeat until we have worked 10 total repeats or 20 rounds, and then I will meet you back here for the Kitchener stitch once more. Alrighty, so my heel is complete, which means I am ready for the Kitchener stitch. My sock is almost done. So this is working exactly the same way as the Kitchener stitch for the toe of the sock. We're just going to trim this end to detach from our working yarn and thread our yarn needle. And then we're going to work the same exact repeat. We're going to knit off the first needle, pull on, and then pull off the second needle, which is also the back needle, of course, and knit on, being sure to give that a nice tug so that it stays secure. We're going to repeat that all the way down, and then I'll meet you back here when I have the last couple of stitches remaining, just like we did for the toe. Okay, I have 2 stitches remaining on each needle, so I'm going to work the full repeat once more. So knit off and pull on the first needle, pull off and knit on the second needle, just like this. And then with these last 2 stitches, I'm going to do exactly the same thing as I did for the toe. So I'm just going to knit off the first stitch, pull off the second stitch, and pull nice and tight, set my needles aside, and then I'll flip to the back of the sock, weave my end in through that very last decrease that I did, and then again insert my hand into the sock, go through a stitch below, come back through. It's a little bit easier to do this for the heel, especially in shorty socks. And then I will weave my end in the same way. So I'm just going to intentionally split a few of the purl stitches and go up and down a few times. There's down, there's up. There we go. And then I'll go down once more. Just to make it extra secure, it's even more important that you do this for the heel because there's going to be a lot of constant wear and rubbing. We want to make it last as long as possible. And there we go. So I'll go ahead and trim that in just to get it out of the way. Now for this second end, I like to weave it through a few of the stitches on the back just to ensure that it's not going to go anywhere and to close up any holes that might still be there. So there's not really any holes, but you can see where there's a little bit of stretching happening right here, just where we picked up those extra stitches. So I'm just going to weave in a couple of those to kind of secure both ends. Just like this, I'm just going in through the purl stitches. Just like that. And I'm just going to do this quite a few times until I feel that it is nice and secure. Maybe just a couple more. Just kind of connecting the sides is what we're trying to do. Whoops, lost it there. Not quite sure how I did that. And there we go. Just go a couple more stitches in. And that should do it. Okay, and now I will just trim this very last end. Flip it inside out, or excuse me, the right side out so that we can really see. And there is our completed sock. I truly hope you found this tutorial helpful and easy to follow and you are ready to finish your very first pair of shorty socks. I am loving this pattern so much. They're so quick. They're perfect for leftover yarn, a full skein of yarn, and you just want to knit a quick pair of socks. They're amazing, and I hope that you have enjoyed learning how to knit these shorty socks. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and check out all of the links in the description box below. Until next time, happy making. Bye!